Hi, everybody. Welcome again to the Interfaith Pastor. Today, I'm going to take a look at the reading that we just had in church this past Sunday. Is from the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles. And the reading is about Paul's missionary journey that he took around the Mediterranean, evangelizing the Gentile or the non-Jewish communities. And this is I'm going to read it to you because I want you to know what I'm referring to. So Paul is in Athens in Greece, and he's at the Areopagus, the great hill, a rock that overlooks the Acropolis. And it's where the philosophers would gather to talk about all the different philosophies of the day. So this is where Paul is, and he wants to talk to them, of course, about Jesus. So here's what's in our text from Sunday. Then Paul stood up before the council of the Areopagus and delivered his address. Citizens of Athens, I note that in every respect, you are scrupulously religious. As I walked about looking at your shrines, I even discovered an altar inscribed to an unknown God. Now, what you are worshiping in ignorance, I intend to make known to you. For the God who made the world and all that is in it, the sovereign of heaven and earth, doesn't live in sanctuaries made by human hands and isn't served by humans as if in need of anything. No, God is the one who gives everyone life, breath, everything. From one person, God created all of humankind to inhabit the entire earth and set the time for each nation to exist and the exact place where each nation should dwell. God did this so that human beings would seek, reach out for, and perhaps find the one who is not really far from any of us, the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Now it goes on for a little more, but that's what I wanted to get into today. This verse that he says about this is in the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Now, Paul starts out in a pretty good way when he's talking to all of these Greek philosophers and other people who would have been there on the Areopagus. He tried to build rapport with them, right? He wanted to affirm who they were and what they did. And he said, I noticed that you are very religious. You have a lot of shrines around here, and you are so religious that you even have an altar that is inscribed to an unknown God. And yes, it is true that there were such things. We have archaeological evidence of altars inscribed like this, and there is a story behind these shrines. Around 600 BCE, there had been a terrible plague in Athens, and there was a poet from Crete, Epimenides, who came forward with a plan. A flock of sheep was let loose in the city, and wherever a sheep lay down, it was sacrificed there to the nearest god. But if it lay down near a shrine of no known god, it was sacrificed to the unknown god. So cover all your bases, right? But evidently it worked, and the plague ended. So there was rationale behind this. But Paul was really trying to build a relationship with him, which is a really wonderful thing to do when you're working in an interfaith environment, right? With people of different beliefs. You want to establish some rapport and understand what they believe and why. Except then he goes on and he breaks the cardinal rule of interfaith dialogue. He tries to proselytize. Of course, that's who he was. That's what he did. But he said, now what you are worshiping in ignorance, I intend to make known to you. Now, of course, when we read this in a Christian church, it's like, okay, this is Paul, that's what he does. But if we're reading this in an interfaith environment, then it's, oh, really? You're going to tell us the right way. Who do you think you are? So how do we take this passage that starts out so well by affirming the beliefs of other people, but then turns into an attempt at conversion? Well, I like to go again to that verse that I believe again takes us into some very common ground. When he talks about the one in whom we live and move and have our being, that is something bigger. Paul, of course, is telling them about Jesus, specifically the post-Easter Jesus, the resurrected Jesus. As I said in our last video, I find it very important to separate the historical Jesus, the Jesus of Nazareth, from the Christ of faith. And both are important. The historical Jesus, when we read the Gospels and read the teachings and we see the example of Jesus, this is all crucial to us. But the Christ of faith, when we start talking about the Christ of faith, then the view widens in space and time, as John in his gospel talks about the Logos at the beginning of creation and equating Jesus with this Logos. And in later years, of course, in closer in time, Teilhard de Chardin talks about Christ as being not just Jesus of Nazareth risen from the dead, but rather a huge, continually evolving being as big as the universe. And theologians, not just Teilhard, but theologians have described this great being as the total Christ, the whole Christ, the cosmic Christ, the universal Christ. Teilhard also talks about something he called the divine milieu. And it's what he described really as what Paul was talking about in what we live and move and have our being. Because for Teilhard, the most important spiritual fact of our existence is that at every moment, you and I are swimming in a divine sea. At every moment, we're inhaling and exhaling divine life. So in the divine milieu, we live and move and have our being. So we can think about Christ as bigger than Jesus of Nazareth, or Jesus of Nazareth embodied this Christ in his time, in his day. And as he rose from the dead, then this Christ, this Logos, this universal Christ, is this colossal, almost unimaginable being. Some people say they talk about the universe. You could say the same thing, or maybe the Tao, maybe Buddha nature, maybe any way that religions talk about that bigger than us, bigger than humanity. And so this is a way for us to think about what we do have in common with everybody else, no matter what their dogmatic beliefs, no matter what their own faith, because our own faith is important to us, but we can come together understanding that this divine milieu in which we live and move and have our being is so much bigger than any of us, even bigger than the human being, Jesus. And so it's a way for us to think about it. It's a way for us to talk to our interfaith friends about it too. And I hope that is helpful. I hope that makes some sense. And I hope that you'll come back for another edition of the Interfaith Pastor. Thanks for coming.